everyone. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Noah Breneman, and I am an oboist here, native of Berks County from Exeter. And I'm super excited to share this music with you. This is my second time performing here at Trinity. My first recital here was 3 years ago, right before I left for grad school in Los Angeles, and now I have since graduated and am back in the area, and this is my first public performance in over a year, something like 140 something days. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy. The first piece is 9 New York City miniatures by Gary Powell Nash. Dr. Nash is the professor of music theory at Fisk University in Tennessee. And this piece actually started out with just one of the movements entitled A Million Number Streets. And then he added additional movements to it to make it a little more marketable. And now it's a suite of miniature pieces all about New York City. The titles also are related to New York. So the first movement called Spreading the News, from the song New York, New York, Mass Transit, Downtown Music, Hustle and Bustle, Vagabond Shoes, also from New York, New York. This is, like I said, a super new work for us in the oboe world, and I think you'll enjoy the energetic intensity of it and all the different rhythms that help to evoke New York City. The next piece is titled The Piper of Dreams by Ruth Gipps. Miss Gipps was a composer in England in the middle of the 20th century. She was a professional oboist and English horn player. She was a concert pianist, and she was obviously a composer and also a conductor. She, as an oboist, has a lot of music written for oboe, about 15 to 17 pieces, ranging from this for solo oboe up to octets for wind instruments. She was very prolific, writing 5 symphonies and a whole lot of chamber music, and she's unfortunately sort of fallen to obscurity based on the fact that not only she was a woman in the middle of the 20th century trying to make a go at music, but also because her compositional style at the time, was considered sort of old school. She studied composition with Ralph Vaughan Williams, and she adopted that sort of English pastoral style to her writing that in the 1950s, the other more prominent composers after the war were moving away from that, and she stuck to what she wanted to do and was sort of looked over for that reason as well. So this piece, The Piper of Dreams, is based off of a painting of the same name by Estella Canziani that was painted in 1915. And it depicts what I believe is a young person with a hat with a feather sitting in the forest surrounded by wildlife, birds, and even little kind of nymphs and fairies in the background. I hope you enjoy. The next piece is entitled Two Inventions by Siegfried Thiele. Thiele is a living composer in Germany. He grew up in and around Leipzig and attended school there, and he has also taught at the Leipzig Conservatory. This piece was written in 1976, and the term invention in music is a term that means a short composition in like two-part counterpoint. So when a lot of musicians hear invention, they think of J.S. Bach writing his two-part inventions for the piano. So obviously you can't really have two-part counterpoint with a solo instrument, so he sort of takes this idea and does his own thing with it. This piece is written in a sort of atonal style, but there's going to be a lot of things you hear that you can grasp onto in terms of rhythm, intervals, and contrasts between very serene and soft playing and then in extremely intense passages. I hope you enjoy. The last piece on the program is the final movement from Benjamin Britten's Six Metamorphoses after Ovid. And Ovid, of course, wrote the Metamorphoses published in 8 AD and deals with metamorphosizing different characters that he writes about. They can change into parts of nature, change genders, colors, all sorts of things. And Benjamin Britten wrote these 6 movements based on characters from the Metamorphoses and about each of the characters' transition. This piece was written in 1951, and Benjamin Britten is considered one of the most important English composers from the 20th century. And he writes in the music a small little poem to be read before each movement. In this movement, entitled Arethusa, you can listen for that transformation in the music. It has this flowing first section and then a very contrasting middle section that I see as the transformation, and then the final section as Arethusa transformed. So here is Arethusa, who, flying from the love of Alpheus, the river god, was turned into a fountain.